today's video, we're building a lumber cart. We're going to turn this into this by building a 5x3 wooden storage cart on Clausen Woodworks. To start off this build, we start by cutting the 2x4 frame. Here I use 3 2x4s in total. The outside dimensions of the cart are exactly 5 feet long by 3 feet deep. Cut the long stretchers at exactly 60 inches, 5 feet, 4 inside stretchers at 33 inches apiece, plus the outside 2 stretchers at 3 inches. That equals exactly 36 inches or 3 feet. I did not pre-drill for the holes in the 2x4 frame using 2.5 inch deck screws. I find the pre-drilling isn't needed, but that's totally up to you. Also cut these 9-inch pieces of 2x4. This is where we are going to mount the wheels on. I wanted to keep this storage cart as low as possible so that I would clear the rails of our 8-foot garage door when I decide to store plywood vertically. Just put the wheels in place. I did not use any measurements to put the wheels in place. Just checked them on both sides to make sure that the brake was clearing the outside frame and screwed them down. And of course, because I have zero skill riding a skateboard, I lay it on the ground and test it out like it is one. Onto the first sheet of plywood, cutting it to 5 feet long and 3 feet wide using the track saw. My Craig track saw. What is a tool if you don't use its name? Putting the piece of plywood down on top of the frame, pre-drilling and driving in 1.25 inch screws to hold it down. Next I started on the second sheet of plywood, cutting it to 5 feet long, leaving it at its 4-foot width and using that as the backer. Unfortunately, I did not get that on film. Using the cutoff from the first sheet of plywood, I start cutting the dividers for the scrap piece of wood on the front side, drew all my lines, and cut the majority of it off at the table saw. I kept these cubbies about 8 inches deep and approximately 14 inches wide. And because they're easy and effective, I use pocket holes to attach the backer and the divider for the cubbies. And this is where a portable Craig jig would even be very efficient. Here I'm bringing this large piece to the K5, or even the new alternatives, the 520 or the 720. They'd be very well suited in this scenario. After measuring out what I needed on the front side, I attached the middle backer and then continued on to connect the dividers in the front, using clamps both vertically and horizontally to stop them from moving as much as possible. Next, using the offcut from the first piece of plywood, I used that as a support in the front to hold pieces in, and then realized I used all my plywood and would have to buy another sheet just to finish up. So I took that piece off and cut it into 3-inch strips, as this was 12 inches tall, and then used 2 pieces, one at the top, one at the bottom for each section, and this turned out just as great. If anything, it made it better and easier to find the wood you need. And I also saved a little bit of money, in a sense. More scrap at the end of the day to go into this cart. Moving on to the top side, I cut this piece of wood at 4.5 inches wide and then ripped a 10-degree angle on one side. This will dictate the back angle at which sheet goods will be stored. Moving on to the lower section, I add these strips for support and then use a 14.5 inch spacer from the bottom, gluing and nailing them in place. On the back side, I did not opt to use a full sheet of plywood as the backer, just to save some money. I feel it wasn't needed anyway. I ripped plywood 4 inches wide, slightly oversized, and then went to the miter saw and cut a 10-degree angle on it to match the other angle. Using a speed square to mark the top edge on the stretchers to mark the cut. Again, using that 10-degree angle here to cut it down. At the bottom of the stretcher, I used pocket holes and used a 2x4 stick to reference the line, clamped it down, and to hold those pieces in place while I drive in the pocket holes. Up top, I placed a clamp, pre-drilled some holes, and drove in 1 3/4 inch cabinet screws. Now that we've completed the A-frame structure in the center, we've put the supports on the one side. Now on the angled portion, on the sheet goods side, we want to put those supports there as well with the 1-inch plywood. So I took those 1-inch pieces and ripped a 10-degree angle on them as well. I used that same 14.5-inch spacer, placing it underneath as straight as possible, clamping it down on one end, moving the spacer to the other end, clamping it down there as well, and then driving in screws from the back. I just used the Craig 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws here. Onto the second shelf on the A-frame. I wasn't able to use the 14.5-inch spacer. I took reference from the main backer and just used a tape measure to bring it to the same height. Measuring the shelves spacing at the longest point and then cutting a 10-degree edge on the one side, sliding it in place, using brad nails to hold it there, and then using 1 3/4 inch cabinet screws from the outside stretchers into the shelf. The bottom shelf measured 11 inches wide and the top shelf measured 8 inches wide. And last piece to finish up the build is this support on the bottom to stop sheets from falling off. This only needs to be just above the height of the frame itself, using the same 1 3/4 inch number 6 cabinet screws to hold it in place. And that's it for the build. Next was the fun process of cleaning up all this junk and moving it into a nice organized area. Now there are so many different versions of storage carts that you can build, varying all in sizes. If you are interested in building one of these, go search YouTube. There are plenty of different makes and models of these. I took inspiration from various different creators and curated it to what I use most, but in combination with the storage rack above, this is the perfect amount of storage that I need at the moment. And that wraps up the wood cart build. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, God bless.